Team 3, Flood Vulnerability Index for Brisbane City. Could you please welcome Dr. Kaitlyn Kim from the Queensland University of Technology, Dr. Jess Hopf from Oregon State University, and Dr. Kate Saunders from Monash University and Queensland University of Technology to the stage.
First and foremost, thank you for having us to present today. We're feeling quite lucky to be able to share with you our solution to this wicked problem. We'd like to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of these lands here today and the lands, unceded lands across all Australia. And in particular, we'd like to thank the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of Minjan in Brisbane, the Turrbal and Yagara people, where this research began. Just as the Maewa shapes country there, the Maewas shaped this research. So today, Kaitlyn, Jess and I will be presenting on behalf of a bigger team. And this team of people actually came together during the Brisbane 2022 floods in response to a hackathon. And what that means is the approach that we present to you today is very much informed by our lived experiences. But not only is it informed by our lived experience, it's informed by our experiences as statisticians, as data scientists, as environmental scientists. We very much understand this problem firsthand of how difficult it can be to connect disparate resources from across society. And to give you a bit more context about how we're thinking about this wicked problem, we just want to remind everybody that floods impact more than just what goes underwater. And actually, flood impacts are going to depend on people's personal circumstances and their individual resilience. And what that means is that the same flood exposure for different people can result in different impacts. So in order for people to be prepared and to respond and to be resilient, that means that they'll all need access to different kinds of information to be flood ready. And to give some context to that, we're now going to share a story from one of our team members who can talk about his impacts during the flooding. And we're also going to share a story from one of the stakeholders who attended our workshop, Colin, about the need for communities to have access to information.
At the time of the 2022 floods, I was living in St. Lucia in Brisbane, which is a highly flooded suburb. We were on a second floor apartment, and the one aspect of our experience of the flood was that we didn't get inundated, but actually our apartment was unlivable for 2 weeks, even when the floodwaters have gone, because we didn't have any power. And we have a 4-year-old, and can't live without power and access to fresh food, hot water, all these things throughout those that sort of durations. We were lucky enough we could get out to family, but not everyone has that kind of luxury.
And I think this is huge opportunities for us to make communities more aware of the hazards, the risk in their communities. One of the biggest challenge out of every community after every disaster is people struggle with information. Having a good system of community information system in place that we can educate community, people have an area where they can get information really quickly so it can inform their decision-making capability. Having a tool well in advance in preparing for disasters is brilliant.
What we learned from the video there is that people need access to information about their individual impacts, and having access to information is really important because that can help people be more prepared. That means they can be more confident about making decisions under times of stress, and that in turn leads to a faster recovery at the other end. And actually, there are lots of different pieces of data and different information available for us to access during these kinds of events. We have exposure information, we have local information about our communities, we have weather warnings, we have local government area information and federal government information, we have road closure information. There's so much out there. But what's happening is that just leading to this issue of being completely overwhelmed by the data. And we are a very data literate team, and we felt overwhelmed. So if you're trying to piece together these different aspects of your data story, you can experience cognitive overload, you can experience confusion, you can experience inaction, and that's not what we want when people are needing to respond in times of disaster. So how do we bring all these different resources together?
Well, this project, or the solution to the wicked problem, is really focused on synthesizing that data for people. And so we can get at the data that's relevant for them to understand the individual impacts. And I'm going to pass over to Jess now so she can talk more about our approach to the problem.
Thanks, Kate. Cool. So our solution to this wicked problem of data overwhelm is what we're calling the Flood Ready app. So the Flood Ready app is a user-centric, user-friendly peacetime tool that's really aimed towards synthesizing all of this really complex data into a tool that personalizes it for the user so they can understand what they need to be flood ready for the future. It is meant to be a peacetime tool, but we do see it being adaptable to be used in real time as well. And I will point out too, we've done a lot of the back end of this, but what you're seeing here is a mock-up. We haven't actually made this app yet. So the way that we see getting people flood ready is first of all by asking them questions about their situation. Where do they live? That's obviously very important. Asking them, do they have caring responsibilities? Do they have dependents or children? Do they have things that are really important and necessary to their day-to-day lives like medication or treatment? Do they have transport such as a car, etc., etc.? And what these questions will really be designed to do is to help us understand and personalize that person's situation so that they can get the information they need to be the most flood ready they can be. So once all that they've answered the question, what the app does is it does some magic behind the scenes, and Catherine's going to talk about that in a minute. But essentially, it takes all that data and it combines it using a established scientific framework, combines it together with data that we have that we know already affects people's ability to respond to floods, combines it all together, and it gives them an indication of how flood ready they need to be. So for example, in this case, the user's need to be flood ready is medium. Flooding and isolation are unlikely, but services such as power and public transport might be impacted. So your house might not necessarily be flooded, but you might not be able to get the kids to school. You might not be able to get to the shops. And that's exactly what Rich was explaining in his situation that we saw earlier. So at the moment, this is just sort of a prototype. We're still working through this, but at the moment we have 3 categories. Your need to be flood ready is normal. Flooding and isolation are unlikely, but it doesn't mean you can just ignore the warnings. You still need to be aware of what's going on in your community. Your need to be flood ready is medium, and I've talked about that already, and your need to be flood ready is high. Flooding is highly likely based on where you are and your situation. And depending on which category you fall into, there's going to be different calls to actions and different recommendations the app will give you depending on your personal situation. So we also want this tool to be helpful during a flooding event. So we also put in there a check trusted resources during an event button. And what this will do will link people through to the resources that are relevant for their area. At the moment, the first stage is to have it linking to external resources, but we actually really ideally down the track want to synthesize all of these resources into the app so that it again takes away data overwhelm and it kind of breaks that circle of having to click through multiple pages to get the information that you want to get to. And I'm sure we've all experienced that before, and the frustration you're feeling just like, oh, give up, I'm walking away from this. So we want to break that, cut it, and distill it down into the app. Really, we do see this app as something that can complement current real-time tools to help people understand their situation and make them go, okay, these are the things I need to do, and not feel overwhelmed by the thought of what might happen in the future. You'll also have noticed that there's a little button at the bottom that says find out how personalization works. So we really want this to be a transparent thing. So what you could do is click on the button and it'll actually take you to the science behind the app so that you can understand how you got the recommendations that you got. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Kaitlyn now, who's going to talk about the scientific framework that underpins all of this.
Thank you, Jess. So the research indicates that personalization of warning serves as a direct and critical psychological facilitator for the final decision and execution of an appropriate response to a hazard. Our Flood Ready app combines personalized inputs from the app quiz results and a robust backend flood index based on academic principles and evidence. The backend flood index is based on the credible formula developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Reports, and this is comprised of 3 components. For our index, that is flood exposure, demographic information, and connectivity and services. The Flood Ready app is innovative, not only because we've taken an open data science approach, combining all these data layers, but also because we personalize result through the front end quiz of the Flood Ready app. This combination of data science and personalization is what makes our Flood Ready app unique. Next, I'll dive a little deeper into the three components, starting with the flood exposure. So we've taken a flood exposure awareness extent layer from Brisbane City Council to calculate flood exposure. When you talk to flood experts, though, one of the first things they'll tell you is that all floods are different. And so our tool is scalable because we have the potential to include multiple layers. So this could be past historical flood events, even future forecasting of floods. It could scale the size of the hazards, such as incorporating spatially explicit local knowledge of things such as flash flooding, and even eventually incorporate additional hazards such as bushfires. So these layers would all combine to create a metric of exposure. So as Brisbane residents, we focused on the Brisbane City Council local government area at the statistical area level 1, which is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. That's roughly equivalent to 1,000 people in a neighborhood. So we can see in the map that the areas around the river and coasts are darker blue, which indicates that those areas are more flood exposed. The next component is demographic information, which captures the innate characteristics of the population. This gives us an indication of which areas are more or less sensitive to a flood event based on population demographics. So here we've used the most recent census data from 2021 at the statistical area level 1. And these population metrics combine to create a measure of sensitivity. So a student who's also a renter might be more sensitive in a flood event. We can see on the map that the darker red areas represent more sensitive areas, which are around the edges of Brisbane City. Some areas have no people living in them, which is indicated by the gray. The index is affordable because we take advantage of open, freely available data, such as the census. And this also makes our index adaptable, as it allows us to easily expand the index to different regions, like neighboring local government areas and even other states. The last component is connectivity and services, and we summarized a variety of services at the statistical area level 1 level. These combine to create a measure of your capacity to function. So a lower adaptive capacity means you're less connected to these essential services. On the map, low adaptive capacity is represented by the darker green, which is concentrated around the edges of Brisbane City. In general, more services in the city are concentrated in the center, which means they have higher adaptive capacity. So far, we've developed this proof of concept for the flood index as the back end of the Flood Ready app. The next steps would be to develop this front end and user-centric quiz and integrate it with the back end to produce the personalized Flood Ready app result. We aim to work with social scientists, communication experts, and communities to co-design these questions. Through these questions, the app can capture important individual characteristics that can impact flood readiness. For example, this could be whether the user is a renter or a homeowner. This user input can provide important granular detail beyond what the back-end flood index alone could provide. As Disaster Challenge finalists, we use the support and network from the Natural Hazards Research Australia to organize a workshop with interdisciplinary stakeholders. It was actually through this co-design process where we conceptualized the development of the Flood Ready app beyond our original flood index project. Another important takeaway was clarifying the target user of our Flood Ready app. Although we've defined the user as the public, the backend flood index will also be freely available to these stakeholders who can gain valuable insights for preparing and planning response to flood events. Flood Ready is designed and intended for the public in the preparation space of the disaster management framework. However, it's also cross-cutting, providing insights to the other areas of the framework. To conclude, Flood Ready aims to improve disaster response through better preparation. And one of the keys with the index is that we wanted to take people's idea of flood risk not only include exposure, but also these other impacts, access to services in their analysis of their flood risk. So the goals of our flood index, of our Flood Ready app are threefold. The first point is we really want to reduce this wicked problem of data overwhelm. We want to help people connect these disparate resources that are across society, personalize that information, and ultimately empower people to be better prepared before a flood event happens. We've come this far with the guidance and support of many people and organizations. We'd like to thank our mentors at QT who've supported us from the very beginning following the Brisbane floods last year, and HRA for supporting us with the workshop and connecting to us to many of those interdisciplinary stakeholders who contributed to the project, the numerous stakeholders who informed our Flood Ready app, and to the people who supported us by making us look good. We look forward to continued conversations around how we can make the Flood Ready app a reality. Thank you.